But the Muslims, the believers in the one God, must not touch that gold. Wrong methodology is to wait for a mountain of the metal to come out of the river. Right methodology is to recognize that this is symbolic language. It has to be interpreted. It could not have been interpreted before 1974. We don't have the time to take you to Bretton Woods. We don't have the time to take you to the International Monetary Fund. We don't have the time to explain to you the origins of the US dollar as the international currency. Suffice it to say that there was a fig leaf of integrity attached to the US dollar, that by international law it was redeemable in gold at the rate of $35 US to 1 ounce of gold. So if you had $35, and if you were a central bank, not Imran Hussein, you could go and knock on the door of Washington and say, Uncle Sam, I want my ounce of gold. That fig leaf disappeared thanks to France, thanks to a very courageous French leader. I met with Dr. Muhammad Mahathir, the Malaysian former Prime Minister, and said to him, you were not the first, Dr. Mahathir. You were the second. The first was Charles de Gaulle, who stood up in the French National Assembly and denounced that monetary system as unjust and paid the price for it, of course. But after he resigned, the French government continued his policy of bringing US dollars and seeking to redeem them for gold until August or September of 1971, when the United States said, now this is too dangerous. They had printed far, far, far more paper than they had gold. Uncle Sam should have been sent to jail. That's fraud. But what Nixon did was to say, we gave our word, but we don't have to keep our word. It's called pacta sunt servanda in international relations. When you give your word, you must keep your word. But he took this international obligation and he tore it and threw it into the garbage bin. And from September 1971, the US dollar was in no man's land. If de Gaulle was still alive, perhaps he could have brought it down. 2 years later, the war took place of 1973, the Arab-Israeli war. And the mastermind was on both sides of the war. And as a consequence of that war, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia imposed an oil boycott on the United States. Most of you probably already know because you've been listening to my lectures, but they knew what would happen if that oil boycott was imposed. They knew. They wanted it. And when the oil boycott was imposed, guess what happened to the price of oil? It rose by 400%, because the US dollar collapsed by 400%. And the Arabs were smiling. They've become fabulously rich overnight. It was at that time that Henry Kissinger pulled off the greatest stunt in human history. And an ocean of oil began to function as a mountain of gold. Know that this is not boasting on my part. You boast, God takes away your knowledge from you. I know that I am the first to interpret it this way. I don't have as yet support from the world of Islamic scholarship, but I have hope for tomorrow. What Kissinger did was to convince King Faisal, who was very simplistic in his thinking, poor man, to violate Islam's commitment to a free and a fair market, to take the beautiful religion of Islam that had come from the Quran and the Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, and put it aside, and to commit himself to sell oil for only US dollars. So they're no longer in no man's land. They're off the hook now. Then he had to convince the other Arab oil producing countries to do the same. And Kissinger was absolutely correct when he said to them, if you do this, you're going to become fabulously rich. And they did it. And in 1974, perhaps it was, that OPEC came into being and formalized the institution of the petrodollar, meaning that the US dollar no longer has any link with gold. The US dollar is now strong and powerful and in constant and perpetual demand, because oil is the greatest commodity traded in the world market. You don't have to bother about a Charles de Gaulle anymore. Even the sky is not the limit. You can print as much as you want. You don't even have to have a printing press anymore. The American president can simply order the Federal Reserve to create $7 trillion with one piece of paper. Distribute it amongst the banks. And when the bank gets 1 trillion, he can now lend how many? 10 trillion. This is worse than abracadabra. It's called fractional reserve banking. And only a people, excuse my language, only a people who have the intellectual acumen of jackasses will fail to see the fraud. But not my audience here today. But when Morsi from Egypt, who's now being entertained in jail, when Morsi in Egypt signs an agreement with the IMF for a loan of 4 billion, then that piece of paper becomes money. If nobody borrows the money, it just remains thin air. But when you borrow the money and you sign an agreement, it now enters into the money system, which is what Morsi was prepared to do. And so they don't need to print paper anymore. You now have digital money. You now have electronic money. The petrodollar allows the US dollar to fly very high. Yesterday it was de Gaulle who recognized the fraud and denounced it. Today it's Russia. And we say thank Allah for Russia. And China is standing firmly with Russia. And India has joined the club. And so has Brazil. And so has South Africa. And hopefully there'll be others to join the club. And it's called BRICS. What BRICS has done is to recognize the fraudulent nature of the monetary system, the petrodollar monetary system, and to seek to offer an alternative that will give to mankind more monetary justice.